The evening sky was painted with fading colors as a pregnant woman made her way down the crowded street, her steps heavy with both exhaustion and the weight of the child she carried. She had been working all day, her body aching and her mind longing for the comfort of home, where quietness and rest awaited her. Yet the road was still long, and every step seemed harder than the last. The marketplace around her buzzed with activity, people moving quickly, carrying bags, chatting, laughing, too caught up in their own lives to notice the struggle etched across her face. But a small group standing near the corner did notice her, though not with kindness. They watched her as she walked slowly, her hand resting against her stomach, and instead of sympathy, they exchanged careless glances, their whispers carrying hints of mockery. The woman lowered her gaze, not wanting to meet their eyes, but she could feel the sting of their judgment like invisible arrows piercing her calm. She tried to focus on the path, telling herself that she only needed a little more strength to reach home. Yet an uneasy feeling spread in her chest as the sound of muffled laughter reached her ears. She could sense the group shifting, their attention fixed on her as if she had become a source of entertainment. The street felt colder, the crowd thinner, and for a moment it seemed as though the world had narrowed down to her tired steps and their silent jeer. She clutched her bag tighter, walking on with as much dignity as she could hold. But inside she wished for the comfort of a kind face, or the safety of familiar walls. The group's laughter grew a little louder, not directed with words, but heavy enough to press on her heart. Something about the way they stood there, with smirks tugging at their lips, made the air feel heavier, as though the evening had taken a darker turn. The woman's heartbeat quickened, her thoughts racing between ignoring them and fearing what might come next. The street that once seemed ordinary now felt like a stage where she had been placed unwillingly, with eyes following her every move. She kept telling herself to stay calm, that she was strong enough to keep walking. But the cruel way they exchanged glances suggested that their intentions were not simple. In that moment, the tired woman's evening, which had started as nothing more than a weary walk home, slowly unfolded into something far more uncertain, as though the shadows around her carried a secret waiting to be revealed. And though she did not yet know it, this night would mark a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had chosen to stand and watch. The woman had almost managed to pass the corner, when suddenly a cold splash of water struck against her side, soaking the edge of her dress and chilling her skin. She gasped, more in shock than pain, and her hand instinctively went to her stomach, as though to shield the child within. For a moment, the world around her seemed to stop, but the silence quickly broke with cruel laughter, echoing from the small group that had been watching her every step. They did not see her exhaustion, nor her quiet strength. All they saw was an opportunity to mock, and their twisted amusement filled the street like a bitter wind. The water itself would dry, but the sting of humiliation was far sharper, crawling over her like a fire she could not put out. She stood frozen, not because of the splash, but because of the realization that instead of kindness, she had been met with cruelty in her most vulnerable state. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the group, and she saw their grins, wide and unashamed, their shoulders shaking with laughter as though they had accomplished something clever. The weight of their stares pressed heavily against her spirit, and she felt the burn of tears threaten to rise, yet she held them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The crowd nearby shifted awkwardly, some pretending not to notice, others whispering in hushed tones, but no one stepped forward, leaving her alone under the sharp edge of ridicule. The woman's breathing grew uneven as she tried to gather her strength, her body trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the raw wound of being treated as less than human. The group's laughter rolled on, careless and cruel. But beneath it all, there was a strange energy, as though even they did not fully understand the weight of what they had done. She remained still, her silence cutting through the noise like a blade, her eyes fixed on them, not with anger, but with something far stronger, an unspoken question of why. That quiet defiance unsettled the air, causing a flicker of unease to pass among those who had moments ago felt so bold. The street was no longer just a road home. It had become a place of trial, where her dignity stood against their mockery. The woman's stillness, the way she refused to lower herself to their level, began to change the rhythm of the moment, as though something larger was about to unfold. Each second stretched longer, carrying with it the heavy suspense of what might happen next. And though her heart raced, she did not move, holding her ground with the strength of someone who knew that humiliation would not define her. What had started as cruel laughter now lingered in the air like a shadow, waiting for the moment when everything would shift, and the group who thought themselves powerful would come to realize just how fragile their mockery truly was. The splash of water still clung to her dress, cold and unwelcome, but the woman refused to let it shake her beyond the moment. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly, and held her stomach protectively, feeling the life inside her as both a comfort and a source of quiet courage. Her hands rested lightly, almost instinctively, guarding the child she carried, and with every breath she took, there was a strength in her posture that seemed to radiate outward, challenging the cruelty that had just touched her. She did not speak, did not raise her voice, and she certainly did not retaliate. Instead, she allowed a heavy silence to fill the space between herself and the group that had mocked her. It was a silence that demanded attention, one that forced the eyes of the onlookers to meet the unshaken calm of her gaze. For a moment, the group froze, their laughter fading as the weight of her quiet strength began to press upon them. The street, which had moments ago echoed with their amusement, now seemed smaller, as if her mere presence had altered the very air around them. Each person in that group felt the sharp edge of their own thoughtlessness reflected back at them in her unwavering stance. She did not need words to assert herself. Every second she stood there, steady and calm, communicated something far more powerful than any outburst could. The silence became a mirror, showing them the emptiness of their cruelty and the depth of her dignity. Pedestrians passing by slowed down, sensing the tension in the air, watching the silent standoff that had replaced the earlier mockery. A faint shiver ran through the group as they realized that their boldness had not intimidated her. Instead, her stillness, her gentle yet firm presence, unsettled them in ways they had not anticipated. Some shifted nervously from foot to foot, while others exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that they had crossed a line far beyond harmless teasing. The woman's focus remained inward, her mind steady, despite the rising anxiety around her. She thought only of keeping herself calm, protecting her unborn child, and maintaining her integrity in the face of senseless behavior. Each heartbeat felt like a drum of defiance, steady and strong, resonating in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the empty spaces of the street. The more she remained silent, the more the mockers began to question themselves, their confidence faltering as the realization set in that no amount of ridicule could touch the strength that came from quiet courage. And in that moment, without a single harsh word, she had shifted the balance of power. The group, once bold and unthinking, now felt the weight of their actions. While she stood tall, calm, and unbroken, a figure of quiet authority that would mark the start of a change, none of them would soon forget. Just as the tension in the street reached its peak, the faint sound of steady footsteps echoed through the alleyway, slicing through the lingering air of unease, like a sharp knife. The woman's heartbeat quickened, a small tremor running through her body, though she remained upright and protective of her stomach. From around the corner emerged a figure that immediately shifted the energy of the entire scene. Her husband appeared, dressed in his sheriff's uniform, every detail of his presence commanding respect without a single word spoken. The sharp badge glinted under the dim streetlights, and the polished boots hit the pavement in a firm, measured rhythm that seemed to carry authority with every step. The group that had been mocking her felt a sudden, almost physical weight pressing down upon them. Their laughter, which had once seemed so bold and carefree, vanished instantly, swallowed by the gravity of his presence. Faces turned pale, smiles faltered, and the previously brazen gestures that had mocked her dignity disappeared as if erased by some invisible force. Even the smallest movement from the sheriff seemed enough to command the street. The sway of his shoulders, the calm precision in his walk, and the quiet intensity in his eyes made it clear that he did not need to speak to make himself understood. The woman took a small, almost relieved breath, realizing that help had arrived in a way more profound than protection alone. He brought authority, respect, and the unspoken power to turn the moment completely. Around them, bystanders froze as well, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. The invisible line drawn between what had been audacious cruelty and the respect that now demanded immediate attention. The group who had dared to humiliate her now struggled to even meet his eyes, their confidence crumbling as they felt the silent command in his gaze. Every step he took toward them increased the suspense, the air thickening as though the street itself was holding its breath. The woman felt a wave of relief mixed with gratitude, but also a strange thrill of tension. She had been protected, yet the unfolding moment carried a quiet lesson that was not yet finished. The mockers fidgeted nervously, whispering to themselves, unsure how to recover, while the sheriff's calm presence radiated strength and certainty. Time seemed to stretch, the street caught in a moment suspended between past cruelty and impending reckoning, and in that charged silence, everyone understood, without a single word exchanged, that the balance of power had shifted entirely. The laughter that had once mocked her vulnerability now seemed distant and foolish, overshadowed by the undeniable authority standing mere steps away. The street had become a stage for something far greater than embarrassment. It had become a lesson in respect, presence, and the consequences of actions when confronted by unwavering integrity. And the moment left everyone, both cruel and innocent, holding their breath as the story continued to unfold in a way none of them would soon forget. The street, once filled with careless laughter and mocking whispers, had transformed into a stage of silent tension, every inch charged with anticipation. The group, who had dared to humiliate the pregnant woman, now froze under the weight of the sheriff's steady gaze. Their boldness, which had fueled their actions only moments ago, began to crumble as the reality of the situation sank in. Eyes darted nervously, avoiding direct contact with the figure of authority before them, and their confident postures slumped into hesitation. A pale color spread across their faces, subtle at first, then unmistakable, as if the color had been drained by a sudden awareness of the dignity they had trampled. They had mocked her, thinking her vulnerable and powerless, but in that moment, they realized they had underestimated not only her inner strength, but also the silent power of her protector. The sheriff's presence carried more than the authority of his uniform. His eyes conveyed disappointment, not anger, but a quiet intensity that seemed to weigh heavily on every person standing before him. There was no need for a raised voice or harsh words. The look he gave spoke volumes, a combination of unspoken judgment and unwavering command that pressed upon them more than any shouted threat ever could. The pregnant woman, though still affected by the earlier incident, now felt a renewed sense of calm as she observed the scene, her hand resting gently on her stomach, sensing the protective force beside her. The mockers shuffled their feet, exchanged nervous glances, and tried to find some way to regain composure, but the moment had passed beyond repair. Even the air seemed heavier around them, thick with the weight of shame and realization. Each second stretched longer, the silence amplifying the intensity, as if the street itself demanded accountability. The sheriff's steady stance and quiet authority seemed to draw the attention of nearby pedestrians as well, who paused to witness the unfolding confrontation, their curiosity mixing with silent approval of the dignity displayed. In that suspended moment, the mockers understood that their courage had been misplaced, that their actions had consequences beyond the fleeting amusement they had sought. The woman's composure, combined with the sheriff's calm dominance, created a tension that held them captive in both fear and respect, teaching a lesson far deeper than they had anticipated. Slowly, their heads lowered, their hands fidgeted, and the bravado that had once guided their cruelty vanished entirely. The sheriff did not speak, did not need to. His presence alone had shifted the balance, transforming humiliation into reflection, arrogance into humility, and fear into understanding. The street, which had moments ago been the site of ridicule, now carried a powerful, unspoken listener, reminder that dignity can never be taken lightly, and that those who seek to harm without thought may one day face a force far greater than themselves, a force that commands both respect and reflection, leaving them pale and silent in the presence of quiet authority. The silence that had fallen over the street lingered like a heavy fog, thick with tension and anticipation, until the sheriff finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the air like a blade. He did not raise his voice, he did not yell or threaten, yet every word carried more weight than any punishment they could have imagined. "You could have offered her a hand," he said, his tone steady, deliberate, and measured, each syllable ringing with authority. "Instead, you chose cruelty. Think about what that says about you." The words hung in the air, heavier than any physical force, and every person who had laughed moments ago felt their impact deep within. Faces that had turned pale moments earlier now seemed to shrink further, as though the light of self-awareness had begun to illuminate the full scope of their actions. The pregnant woman remained still, her hand gently resting on her stomach, her eyes wide but calm, feeling a sense of relief not only from the presence of her husband, but from the clarity of the lesson unfolding. The group that had mocked her shuffled nervously, their voices caught in their throats, their previous arrogance replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of their own cruelty. The street, once filled with echoes of laughter, now resonated with the weight of reflection, the sheriff's words reverberating in every corner, every stone, every shadow. The calmness in his voice was like steel, steady and unyielding, forcing them to listen, not with fear of punishment, but with a deep understanding of the wrong they had committed. The bystanders who had paused to watch now leaned forward slightly, sensing the gravity of the moment, aware that something more than a scolding was taking place. The message was simple, yet profound. Actions have meaning, choices have consequences, and the character of a person is revealed not in their power, but in how they treat the vulnerable. The mockers could no longer hide behind excuses or laughter. Every instinct told them to shrink away, to recognize the gap between what they had done and what they should have done. And still, the sheriff did not raise his voice. He allowed the silence to amplify his words, letting the pause between each sentence sink deeper into the minds of those who needed to hear it most. The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in her body easing, as she realized that justice did not always come through anger or confrontation, but sometimes through calm authority and words that strike harder than any punishment ever could. The group remained frozen, their faces pale, their pride shattered, and their understanding dawning painfully slowly, as though the weight of the lesson would take time to settle. The sheriff's voice, steady and unwavering, continued to echo in their minds long after the words had been spoken, leaving a mark of awareness, humility, and respect that no shouting or anger could have achieved. And for that quiet, yet profound moment, the street seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a lesson in dignity, morality, and human compassion that none present would ever forget. The group who had laughed and mocked the pregnant woman moments before now stood in stunned silence, their heads slowly lowering as a heavy wave of shame washed over them. What had started as a careless, thoughtless act meant to amuse themselves at someone else's expense, suddenly felt like a mirror held up to their very character, reflecting every flaw, every lapse in judgment, and every shred of arrogance they had carried into the street. The woman remained calm, her hand gently resting on her stomach, her breathing steady despite the earlier humiliation, and the contrast between her quiet strength and the group's faltering composure was striking. Beside her, the sheriff stood like a silent pillar of authority, his calm gaze assessing each person without judgment or anger, yet conveying a quiet but undeniable truth, that cruelty, no matter how small or seemingly harmless, reveals more about the person who commits it than the one who suffers it. The group shuffled their feet, glanced nervously at one another, and avoided eye contact with both the woman and the sheriff, realizing that the pride and boldness that had given them courage before now seemed foolish and fragile. Each member of the group felt a tightening in their chest, an unspoken understanding that their laughter had been hollow, their bravado temporary, and their choices had exposed a weakness within themselves they could no longer ignore. The street, once a scene of chaos and mockery, had transformed into a quiet chamber of self-reflection, where the presence of dignity and calmness forced them to confront their own shortcomings. Pedestrians who had paused to watch sensed the tension, holding their breath as though the lesson unfolding before them carried weight far beyond what the eye could see. The group could feel the scrutiny in the sheriff's quiet demeanor, not through words or punishment, but through the undeniable authority that radiated from his presence, teaching them in a way that anger never could. Meanwhile, the woman's composure, her ability to withstand cruelty without yielding to anger or despair, shone as a testament to human resilience, a gentle yet powerful force that highlighted the stark difference between courage and thoughtless cruelty. For each of the mockers, the realization grew steadily. The laughter they had shared was not just misplaced. It was an exposure of their own insecurities and lack of empathy. Their hands twitched nervously, their shoulders slumped further, and the silence between them grew heavier with every passing moment, as if the street itself weighed their guilt. Time seemed to stretch, each second reinforcing the truth they could no longer deny. The strength of others can illuminate the weakness within ourselves, and calm integrity can command a reflection far deeper than any shouted reprimand. In that suspended, tense atmosphere, the group understood, though they may never fully admit it aloud, that they had witnessed a lesson of true human strength and morality. And the image of the pregnant woman standing tall beside the composed sheriff would remain etched in their minds, a reminder of their own failings and the path they would have to choose differently in the future. From that day on, the story of the pregnant woman and her husband spread through the town like a quiet wind carrying a powerful lesson, whispered first among neighbors and then shared at workplaces, schools, and markets, not as a tale of punishment or humiliation, but as a story of grace, dignity, and the quiet strength that comes from compassion. People remembered how a single act of calm authority could transform a moment of cruelty into one of reflection, and how the courage of the woman, standing tall despite fear and embarrassment, had revealed the hidden vulnerability in those who had sought to mock her. The sheriff's presence, unwavering and firm, yet free of anger, became a symbol in the minds of townsfolk of what true leadership and moral strength look like, showing that respect and authority are far more powerful when combined with calm wisdom rather than force or intimidation. Conversations often circled back to that evening, recalling how the mocker's confidence had evaporated in an instant, replaced by the awareness of their own misjudgment, and how the woman's silence had struck deeper than any words, leaving an imprint on everyone who witnessed it. Parents shared the story with children to teach lessons about empathy and respect, reminding them that even in small acts of kindness or the absence of cruelty, true character is revealed. Friends discussed it in cafes and on park benches, noting how dignity and composure can transform fear and shame into reflection and understanding, and how sometimes the quietest actions carry the loudest messages. The pregnant woman's bravery, paired with the sheriff's composed intervention, illustrated the idea that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly, steady, and unyielding, affecting change without a single raised voice. Over time, the story became more than just a retelling of an incident. It became a part of the town's moral compass, a reference point for how people could act with integrity, even when faced with cruelty or thoughtlessness. Whenever someone faced mockery or intimidation, they would recall her quiet courage and his measured authority, drawing inspiration from the way they had handled the moment with patience, dignity, and empathy. The lesson endured because it was human, real, and relatable. Respect cannot be demanded through fear, and true power is shown through compassion, restraint, and the ability to inspire reflection in others. The townspeople carried this memory as a gentle guide in their own lives, understanding that kindness, patience, and moral courage leave a deeper mark than any punishment or reprimand ever could. And so, long after the incident on that quiet street, the story continued to influence hearts and minds, reminding everyone that dignity and respect matter most, and that true strength is often revealed not in loud confrontation, but in the calm, compassionate, and unwavering actions of those who choose to act with both courage and grace.